Welcome, everyone. This is the 2022 Selling More Maine Food Series, Selling in Today's Food and Beverage Industry. My name is Tanya, and I'll be your moderator for this section. Just a reminder, folks, as you're joining the call, if you can please put your sound on mute. That would be super helpful. And this is the first session of the webinar series, Selling in Today's Food and Beverage Industry. Today, we'll focus on the future of the food industry with data and trend information from our two presenters who we'll introduce momentarily. As we're getting settled again, just a quick reminder, folks can keep your microphone on mute if you're not talking. That would be super helpful. Everybody, please take a moment to just check and make sure your sound is muted. Today's session will be recorded and posted online. If you do not want to be recorded, please shut your video off. Just a little bit of background on the series. Selling More Maine Foods is an information and education series for value-add food and beverage producers in Maine. The three-part series is coordinated by 4 organizations. I work with Maine Food Strategy, which convenes people across the state to work on projects that benefit from state-level collaborative approaches. And I'm going to introduce my other partners with the project, handing it off to Sue. And again, Sue, before you get started, just a note, I think somebody is unmuted. If folks could please mute your phone if you're not speaking, that would be super helpful.
Thanks, Tanya. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sue Hansen, and I'm a program manager at the Maine Center for Entrepreneurs, MCE for short. So MCE is a nonprofit organization. We're actually going into our 25th year of being in business, and we really work with Maine entrepreneurs to provide the tools and resources they need to successfully build and grow their businesses. We really focus on business and market development. And thanks to our partner, Focus Maine, over the last 4 years, or in the last 4 years, we've added 2 specific programs built for food and beverage companies. We have our Cultivator program, which is for established food and beverage companies that are past the startup stage and are looking to scale up. And then we have our Market Share program, which is for more mature companies looking to more aggressively expand regionally and nationally. So the Market Share companies have already invested some money into scale and are ready and really want to grow more aggressively outside of the state of Maine. And in the last 4 years, we've worked with over 60 food and beverage companies and recognize a bunch of you on the call here today. We also have a Top Gun program, which is for startups, that we've had about 50 food and beverage companies go through over the last 12 years. So we love working with food and beverage companies, and we're excited you guys are all here today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing today's speakers and continuing the series. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sue. And I think we're going to hand it off to Christine to introduce her organization.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Cummings, Executive Director of the Maine Grocers and Food Producers Association. MGFPA is a membership-based business trade association representing Main Street businesses, including independently owned and operated grocery stores, convenience stores, supermarkets, and food and beverage producers and processors. We are primarily a legislative advocacy organization. We are based in Augusta, and I spend much of my time at the State House during the legislative session. Some of you may know the legislature resumed last 2 Wednesdays ago, January 5th. We will work closely with the Maine Department of Ag, Department of Labor, DECD, and others, and serve as a liaison for our members working with the state and the administration. We are a community dedicated to the prosperity of Maine's grocery and food producer industry through excellence in advocacy, networking, and education. And if we can be of any assistance to any of you, I encourage you to reach out with any questions. I'm excited for this morning's presentation, so thank you to Jeff and Matt. But before we get started, we'll hand it over to Bill.
Good morning, I'm Bill Soretta, Executive Director of Fork Food Lab. Fork Food Lab is a nonprofit shared commercial kitchen. We're focused on growing the local Maine food economy by supporting growth of sustainable Maine-based food businesses and providing them with workspace, equipment, resources, and access to locally sourced ingredients. We currently have over 50 members and expect to grow to 75 by year end. As we move to a new facility, a much larger facility in South Portland on Darling Ave. In that facility, we will be expanding our program by adding a fairly extensive processing and packaging capacity for growing businesses. And we'll also have space available for private businesses to rent as well as separate commercial kitchens. Thank you for attending today's event. We have 2 more coming up, and we hope you all find this very helpful.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks to my co-host, and we're pleased now to introduce our panelists. We're joined this morning by Jeff Crumpton, Manager of Retail Reporting Solutions at Spins, and Matt Cotton, founder and CEO of Rooted Food Sales. Jeff and Matt are going to present, and then we're going to have some time for Q&A. And if folks have questions during the presentations, please post those in the chat. If we don't get to all the questions this morning, we'll try to answer those after the webinar and forward that to folks who are on the call today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. Thanks, gentlemen, for sharing your insights with us, and we're pleased to have you.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. And thanks for everyone for attending today. Just going to kind of go over a couple of things as we get started. I am the retail product marketing manager at Spins. I've recently moved over to our marketing department. But we are a wellness-focused data technology firm. We work with retailers, distributors, brands, certifiers, organizations such as yours to be able to kind of understand the broader marketplace. We provide all sorts of analysis and consulting services. And really, we have a lot of expertise when it comes to unique product attributes. My experience, I've been with Spins for about 10 years, but I started in the industry on the buying desk at the fresh market, which is still near and dear to my heart. Next slide, please. All right, so what we're going to do today is just kind of go over a little bit of the market overview. And if we can move to the next slide. The first thing on the right-hand side, you're going to see our primary data sources. You're going to see first that we're going to use our proprietary POS sales and our product attribution. So these POS sales are from retailers that we work with. And then you can see that we kind of divide that into 2 different kind of channels that we're going to be looking at today. One is going to be that natural and regional grocers. So a lot of the grocery stores that are in the Northeast, I am in the Northeast, I'm in upstate New York. And so these are types of retailers that are really, the leading indicators. They really have all the cool, fun products, that we see in store. They lean into innovation. They respond to what customers are looking for. And then you can see kind of at the bottom, the blue, this is going to be the conventional multi-outlet. And we received this through our partnership with IRI. And these are those mainstream, you think of them as Target or Walmart. It kind of completes the view of the market. But really the difference between natural and regional and conventional is that all that innovation starts natural and regional and then moves through the life cycle into multi-outlet. On the left-hand side, obviously, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about some of the COVID implications that we've been through and that we still, in some ways, are dealing with. There's been a massive shift in consumer shopping habits. And that means that e-com growth that we expected to take 5 to 10 years has really occurred within 2 years. So for a retailer and for brands, obviously, an omni-channel approach to how they reach to those shoppers are really important. Obviously, labor and supply chain issues are still, challenges for both retailers and brands. And we see that when it comes to natural and regional grocers, that they do, frankly, a better job. They're getting local products. The manufacturing to store, they have those great relationships with these local companies. And so that's, one way that we think about how natural and regional grocers really kind of lean in and sort of excel when some of the other ones, these larger companies can't. We've seen also a real focus on wellness and immunity by shoppers. This kind of period of uncertainty and unknown, the idea that, as a shopper, I have some control over what I'm purchasing, and that wellness and immunity means that I'm taking care of myself in this time of uncertainty, and they're looking to the food and bev industry to be able to help with that. And then, frankly, just a greater focus on sustainability, kind of fair trade, whether that's, B Corp or, fair wage practices, diversity, and then of course, animal welfare. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is just kind of give you an idea of the overall market. And so we're going to be looking first at wellness products, and we're going to define wellness by either looking at naturally positioned products or specialty and wellness positioned products that kind of lumped together in one group. And then we're going to do a bit of a contrast here and look at conventional products. And, again, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that the last several years, we've seen, sales growth rates for grocery like in sky high territory. So that 2019 to 2021, it was, just like in the stratosphere. And then cycling that year, we saw some declines. And now that we're kind of going into year 3, we start to see some of these numbers. And so you see we're 4.3%, 4.6%, traditionally that would seem to be rather low, but frankly, that's, still outpacing the 1 to 2% that we're seeing kind of overall in the market. And then you'll see that those conventional products, certainly the lion's share of volume, but you can see that that's flat to growing at not even 1%. So just a kind of an idea that as we look through the data today, we're going to be focusing on those wellness products, naturally and specially positioned. Next slide, please. So just definitionally, if we're thinking about these 3 that I've mentioned, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what falls where. So the positioning that we do is proprietary. We've got about 50 folks in our Chicago office that look through this and kind of sort each of the products, the 3 million items we have in our database, into one of these 3 positioning groups. So you can see natural, these are core natural products that you're probably very familiar with. Specialty and wellness, these are products that have a unique flavor profile. They may be imported, they may be local. So really, we always kind of talk about it as a very foodie driven, artisanal type product. And then again, conventional. So this is exactly what you would expect it to be, just purely mainstream products. And next slide, please. So just to kind of give you an idea of the rise in health and wellness and why it's important. On the left, we're looking at the share of volume derived from either those health and wellness products or conventional products. And you can see that 75% of it's coming from conventional, and then the other 25 is coming from health and wellness. But what's really impactful here is if we look at the share of growth versus last year, 63% of the growth that we're seeing within the broader marketplace is coming from these health and wellness products. And then only 37% are coming from these more conventional products. So obviously the story here is that these kind of natural and specialty health and wellness products are really leading that innovation. Customers are, are being driven to them. We see brands, looking at R&D and their portfolios to make sure they align to this health and wellness. So I thought this was something really important to show as we kind of get started. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about, we're looking at this conventional. I wanted to break it into total US and then also look at the Northeast so that we could look at something specific to our neck of the woods. And you can see that, conventional products, 2% for total US marketplace, and that the health and wellness are growing twice that rate at about 4%. You can see that in the Northeast that those conventional products are declining by about 1%, where in the Northeast, they're growing about 2% for health and wellness. So again, in the context of kind of the crazy spikes in sales that we've seen, you still get an idea that health and wellness continues to increase across all geographies that we're looking at. Next slide, please. And if we look at this at a department level, so kind of think of this as a very rudimentary store layout. We can kind of pull out a couple of areas here. And it's that same kind of idea of looking at the percent of sales coming from these health and wellness, and then the percent of growth coming from that. So if I kind of start bottom right and look at frozen, it's 17% of sales, but it's driving 61% of growth. If I'm looking at refrigerated, all the growth is coming from health and wellness. And, not surprising, a lot of this is probably food and some of the some of the vitamin supplement trends that we're seeing, some of the functional kind of ingredients coming over into those beverages. But 100%, that's pretty significant. Grocery, you see 24% of sales coming from health and wellness, but it's driving 76% of growth. If we look at the pet department, you see 15% of sales, but 22% coming from growth from health and wellness. And then body care, 28%. So twice the share is coming from the growth in body care. So just again, just to kind of lay the landscape, just kind of on a store level, kind of what we're looking at. And if we move to the next slide, then just if we're going to look at a couple of different categories within the space, we're frozen entrees. You can see that growth, 32% of health and wellness year over year, bread and baked goods, 5%, refrigerated creams and creamers of 18, breakfast foods, 27, functional beverages, 19, deodorants, so body care. We saw a lot of declines there, but health and wellness products are up 31%. And again, some of that pet waste management and pet up 33%. So this is just emblematic of the fact that health and wellness isn't just one or two different categories. It really does speak to, the entire store across the entire landscape. Next slide, please. All right, so for the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at, this is total marketplace. So these are all retailers, small and large, across the country. The first, I'm going to look at the growth year over year. And so you can see internal medicines, personal hygiene, performance nutrition, sun and insect. These are the top growing categories. You can see the sales volume dedicated to each of those. And then if you look on the right-hand side, we're looking purely at volume, and then you can see that growth rate. So just a couple of insights that I see here. We saw that body care over the last couple of years really took a hit when people worked home. So it's interesting to see that we start to see that return of things like sun and insect protection. A lot of folks were out this summer. If we look at deodorants and antiperspirants, it's really kind of things opening back up, people kind of getting back, trying to get back to normal. But then you have things like internal medicines and some of the other superfoods and whole foods. Again, this really kind of speaks to that immunity and wellness that I spoke of earlier. And then you have some of these kind of quick meals, refrigerated entrees, frozen breakfast foods. Folks are still at home, still zooming into work in some cases. So they're looking for something easy that they can fix. They may still have kids at home zooming in for classes. So this kind of mix of products is an interesting thing to kind of see. And frankly, if we looked at this, a year ago, 2 years ago, this list would have been completely different. And just from a volume standpoint, we saw alcohol really take a huge increase over COVID. So it's kind of interesting to see some of that kind of back off a little bit with wine and spirits kind of declining here. But we still see things like shelf-stable water, a lot of immunity type products coming into that space. And some of the other beverages, produce is still up. Shelf-stable functional beverages is the number 2 category that we've been looking at. That's almost 20% growth. That's fairly significant. That's all driven from that health and wellness. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at this from the Northeast, where we're located, it's pretty consistent. Some of these have moved a little bit, but the one thing that is interesting to me is that on the Northeast marketplace by percent change, we see health and wellness, cosmetic and beauty products starting to enter the list again. Where that was really down in the doldrums, that is starting to return. The others are pretty much the same. And if we look over to the total volume, you can see some familiar items there. You see that frozen and refrigerated meats, poultry, and seafood. Again, people are still cooking at home. There's a difference between going into restaurants versus dining at home. You see some of the cheese and plant-based cheese. You see chips, so they're still snacking, yogurt still snacking. And so this list makes sense, kind of how we would usually think about these products, but it's just kind of interesting to see the order. Next slide, please. And I wanted to kind of finish up today by looking at top wellness growing attributes. So we're not looking at all items total store. We're really still focused, hyper-focused on this health and wellness lens of the market. And I wanted to kind of see what are some of the top driving attributes kind of in that filtered set. So you can see things like coral reef safe, aluminum free. Some of these are general merchant body care specific, but you can see the detox project. We see paleo position. So we really see some of the diet trends still playing a role here. Grain-free, certified paleo, vegan, it really kind of aligns to some of the plant-based we also see on the list, grass-fed. So it's really about the idea of sustainability. You see a lot of better for the earth, the vegan and the plant-based are really about kind of, more plants in your diet. You see the kind of the removal of other products from kind of body care. You really get into, I think of, in my mind, organic and natural being kind of just table stakes at this point. And then you have all of this innovation that kind of occurs within that space. So by looking at health and wellness, we've already kind of laser focused in on that natural and organic. And these are the kind of the additional attributes that fall kind of under that broader umbrella. And then again, if we wanted to look at the Northeast marketplace, it's pretty consistent. What we're seeing elsewhere across the country, we're also seeing in the Northeast. There are a couple of differences. We see sodium lauryl sulfate free, that's some body care stuff that's entered there. The order is a little bit different, but for the most part, trend wise, we're seeing fairly consistent results. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He's going to obviously kind of dive deep into some of the great, food service. We've been looking at retailers, but we know that in many cases, the trends that we see in food service, either start or come to retail, depending on what that trend looks like. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You see my information below.
Thank you, Jeff. Nice to meet everyone. So my brief bio, about 35 minutes from the main border. I'm in Newburyport, Mass. I've been Director of Food Service Sales for 3 companies. 2 were emerging brands that I helped spearhead their growth into food service, and then worked for a larger, more conventional food company in between. Have always been really passionate about that emerging better for you brand. And I got fired up in early 2020 to start my own food service brokerage. And so I started Rooted Food Sales then. We represent better for you brands, a few of them shown here, Healthy Kombucha, Vienna Snacks, Good Crisp as well, to show a few. And we are their sales arm in the food service channel, going after operators, enforcing distribution and growing the distribution. So that's our day-to-day in the Rooted Food Sales world. So today I really want to talk, our day-to-day, the heart and soul of Rooted is from a sales perspective. So I wanted to speak about trends we're seeing in food service from a sales perspective, how you can get in. I know food service is a very mysterious world to many. Many CPG brands really start off in retail or e-commerce, and when they think about food service, it's this foreign world, and food service is an amazing channel to grow a brand, to grow a business. So I was going to speak about trends and how to enter the food service world. So there are many, many different channels in food service. And I think a lot of people, when they think food service, they kind of just think restaurants. And there's just so many different channels to go after. So the primary channels that we focus in with our brands, college, university is an incredible segment. Obviously, kind of a dream come true to have 18 to 21-year-olds falling in love are consuming your brand slash products. The volume can also be pretty strong in that space as well. And also when we think about different categories, we think about what would kind of force distribution, just so you're not spinning your wheels, not going to the single coffee shop, and if they want product, it's not enough volume for the distributor to bring in that product. So college, university, for the most part, any college larger than 3,000-4,000 is going to be large enough to force distribution. Convenience, another really strong channel. Really 15 plus units for convenience stores can be large enough to force distribution. Corporate cafeterias has slowed during COVID, but that's starting to make its way back. Grocer prepared foods, another amazing channel within food service. And so not the center aisle. So for us, we really think about, and they have their own director of food service or prepared foods and their own different distributor who's delivering to that part of the store. Really the open air coolers and the hot bar and the salad bar. And then lastly for us, at our primary channels would be QSR or quick serve restaurants. That's anywhere from a salad bowl type place to coffee shops, smoothie juice as well. So these are all incredible segments to focus your efforts on. And then briefly, secondary channels, stadiums, healthcare, home meal delivery really popped at the beginning of COVID, and that business is still strong, although it's slowed. Hotels, restaurant chains, and then travel as well. So these are our main areas of focus and really would be for the majority of food brands. So as far as what's shifted during COVID, like I mentioned, corporate cafeterias is definitely, work from home is mostly what companies are doing now. So we spend less of our attention there. College and university, for the most part, it's ebbed and flowed, but it feels pretty normal at this point. And then, like I said, home meal delivery really presented itself as a very strong channel, and it is here to stay for sure. So other changes as we enter, if I can call this a post-COVID world. So it's very interesting to me as a sales guy. Pre-COVID, if you wanted to sell your product, you would be on the road the majority, call it 4 days a week. If someone had interest in your product, you would hop in your car, you jump on a plane. There wouldn't be a thought of ever sending samples. Never. It would be go visit them face to face, even if it was a 25-minute meeting. That, which I enjoy, has completely shifted. I mean, there will never be anything more powerful than an in-person meeting. That is for sure. But it is the norm to send samples, follow up with a virtual call. And that is here to stay. Buyers, I really never even had a video sales calls with buyers, and now, that is the norm to screen share, present your pitch deck, send in samples. So besides corporate cafeteria slowing down, also Dot Foods is a major distributor, a real game changer for brands. So unfortunately, with supply chain, they're not looking at new brands right now. So that's been an adjustment. College, like I mentioned, has ebbed and flowed. I'd also say, distributors. would never really would welcome new products with completely open arms, but you could go through the front door with distributors and show your products. Now more than ever, though, with distributors really being burned the last couple years, they're more closed than ever to new items. So for me, I translate that as it is more important than ever to bring in the chicken or the egg game, finding that operator interest and bringing that operator interest to the distributor. If you go to Cisco North New England with a fun, shiny, innovative product, they just don't know they're going to move product, and especially now they're going to be more closed. But if you go to the ski resort, the college, the restaurant chain, and you bring that interest to Cisco, they're often forced to bring product in. So that's more important than ever now in that chicken or the egg game, to find that operator interest and bring that to distributor. So that means not finding, like I said, Jane's single juice shop. It's finding Jane's 5-chain juice shop, and bringing that interest to the distributor. So lack of trade shows, making its way back, but trade shows were an amazing way to get a ton of exposure and a ton of conversations in a couple days. Those have been lacking the last couple years. That says there is a group, ECRM, who hosts virtual events. And that's how they held them even pre-COVID, was virtually. So those events are awesome. I've done several of them, so those could be interesting to check out as well. And then having to adapt company culture. So just in this virtual world, it's just interesting for me, working with so many brands, and just everyone has a remote team now, and it's just interesting to see what people do to connect virtually. So as far as what's trending, so for me, I'm always interested. At the end of most buyer calls, I ask what they're actively looking for, and then the question, I don't know if I wasn't supposed to pick questions mid-chat, but do you find the ECRM to be expensive? All shows are kind of a roll of the dice. I think they're around 3 to 4K. So it's like signing one new account, the show can easily be worthwhile, because you can be talking, depending on what specific show you do. If you do a college university show and you get 1 or 2 colleges, that could be totally worthwhile. They're QSR events. You can speak to so many restaurant chains in a couple afternoons. So they are expensive, but unlike a virtual show where a $5,000 booth becomes honestly a $30,000 booth, because most people fancy out their booth. You fly everyone in. So it's very costly. With ECRM, there's no extra cost. It is what it is. You show up virtually. I guess the only other extra cost would be sending samples to customers. So yeah, I find ECRM pretty strong. As far as what's trending, always am asking buyers what they're actively looking for. Plant-based, gluten-free are just consistently on a tier of their own. Really, keto, I don't hear about as much. And then I would also add regional as well. That's something that they want to be able to share with their consumers. So if your product is plant-based or is gluten-free, make sure to get out ahead of it and share that in your intro emails about your brand to buyers, because buyers are actively looking for that. But any of these attributes, I would share. They all get brought up in my world. And and then as far as the regional piece, as far as well, I guess transitioning to where to begin, definitely start regional. I feel like people just root for the local company, and it's just they want to be able to share that they serve local products. So reaching out to your all the categories I talked about, but reaching out to your local colleges, your local coffee shops, your local hospitals, and share, pulling at the heartstrings. Food service, which I enjoy, is way less data driven than retail. You're not reaching out. You're really not reaching out with data or promotional schedule. You're reaching out, pulling at the heartstrings, creating excitement. And so talking about the story of the brand, the attributes, and once again, here's what I find trending. Mention that you're local. And as far as where to begin, there's lots of different ways to find contact information. These are a few paid ways. There's definitely non-paid ways as well. NACOS is a college and university organization, and they put on regional trade shows and a national trade show. If you sign up for their membership, which I think is $600, you get their whole directory. So there are hundreds of colleges, and it lists, University of Maine, it will be their dietitian, their executive chef, their buyer. So all that info comes with a membership. So that's a nice, easy way to get contact information. Also, without NACOS, honestly, colleges are a great way to get started. I mean, you can just Google for the most part. Hopefully I'm not off with University of Maine, but University of Maine dining, and it will say, meet the team. Sure, I'd love to meet the team. And it will provide all the email addresses and contact information. So that's a great way to find out who to reach out to. Seamless AI and Chain Store Guide. Those are paid platforms which make prospecting a lot easier. It just makes it really easier compared to like Google and doing the Google and LinkedIn thing to find contact information. Although LinkedIning around and Googling around will always have its place to find contact information. So yeah, in general, where to begin? I would say starting local, making sure, just so you're not spinning your wheels, to reach out to the accounts that, if they say yes, are going to be large enough to force distribution. So that's that college larger than 3,000. If it's a convenience store, larger than 20. QSR larger than 5. Most hospitals would force distribution. So yeah, that when they say yes, you can find out who their distributor is and bring that interest to the distributor, and it will be large enough to force distribution. And that is all I have to share for now. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Jeff. We do have a few questions in the chat, and again, invite folks to add your questions there. We have about 20 minutes until we conclude at 9, so I'm going to start to hand some of those questions off to you guys. One of the questions early on had to do with certified organic and whether that's a wellness attribute that's ranked, and I think this question might be for Jeff.
Yeah, so certified organic is something that we have in our database. It is kind of part of, it's different than obviously natural. Natural is kind of less defined. Where certified organic, we get those values from the USDA. So that 1 to 69, 70 to 94, 95 to 99, 100%. It does exist within this health and wellness deck, kind of the information that I provided today. It's foundational, frankly, to kind of everything that I looked at today. So when for example, the last slide that I kind of went over and looked at some of those trends, I didn't call out organic specifically. I called out the top attributes within that space, but the organic products are going to fall within that health and wellness cut of the data.
Thanks, Jeff. We also had a question early on about growth trends in the dairy industry. Is that anything either of you can address?
I mean, we've seen growth in dairy depending on the category. So we, certainly over the last couple of years, plant-based alternatives have been quite hot. but we've seen, the other kind of categories within how we define dairy. So that could be, kind of refrigerated in our parlance. So that could be like dips. It could go all the way from, eggs to anything kind of in the refrigerated section. I think that there are bright spots and there are some that have kind of lagged depending on the category that we're looking at. But, I think that across the store, we've seen that with folks dining out less, that we see more growth kind of within these, some of the perimeter, but certainly kind of center store departments that we've been looking at.
Thanks, Jeff. I think the next one is a question for Matt having to do with whether brands need to be repackaged or repositioned if they're in retail and trying to move into food service.
So I'd say for the most part that center store packaged goods are selling the same pack size in retail and food service. But if you're going to be selling to kitchens, like if you're selling a 2-pack frozen veggie burger to Whole Foods, that you're going to need a different pack size. It's going to go from a 2-pack to a 24-pack in a cardboard box for food service of kitchen items like veggie burgers or empanadas. So, yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Question for Spins for Jeff around food categories with low market penetration but high growth. Anything you can share on that?
Yes, so, I'll use an example of kind of plant-based because that's been one that we've really been tracking over the last couple of years. What we see is that when if we think about kind of more established plant-based categories, plant-based meats, kind of dairy alternatives, some of the frozen desserts that are kind of dairy alternatives, those tend to be kind of the larger kind of mainstays of that particular segment. When we get into kind of new innovation, kind of the kind of the new products entering the market, it takes us a little bit of time to kind of catch up on that coding. So we get anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 new products in our database every month that we have to code. And so, part of that is doing all of the research behind where they go in the hierarchy, how they're coded, what are the unique product attributes. Some of that we're using some OCR technology to kind of get at the ingredients. That's how we get to some of the diet. Is it paleo? Is it plant-based? Is it vegan diet? That's different than if it's, vegan positioned. Is it called out as a product attribute by the manufacturer, brand, as plant-based or vegan or any other kind of attribute? So kind of using that plant-based example, vegan and plant-based are very closely correlated to each other. Vegan is obviously much more strict when it comes to what the consumer is looking for. But a lot of times we will use that vegan attribute to do something like, how are new plant-based products proliferating through the store? Is it moved from, kind of a food category into something like a beverage category? Has it moved from something like a traditional kind of plant-based product into something like the chip aisle, where we're replacing a cheese product with a plant-based cheese? So you could get like a cheese puff, but it's using a diet cheese or something like that. And so kind of part of what we're doing and kind of these kind of new entrances that we see in the new attributes, new kind of product attributes in the market, is to kind of use some of that the attribute coding that we have, and we do look at that quite a bit. And so the attributes that I kind of shared with you at the very end, fall into these kind of broad categories of sustainability, fall into animal kind of welfare. So whether it's grass-fed, whether it's humanely raised, if it's antibiotic free, all of these are kind of like different attributes that we can start to kind of bucket into different areas. Did I answer the question?
I think so. There's a sort of something related too that's come up in the chat about how many products are in your database. Is that something you can share?
Yeah, we have about 3 million, and that that would be products that are new coming in, and that also would be anything that's discontinued. So we're going to obviously do some house cleaning as we have products that kind of fall off of sales, and so that number's, you know, up and down. The number is probably a little bit lower than in years past, just because we have manufacturers that have prioritized, you know, sort of UPCs within their product portfolio. You know, if they have supply chain issues, they may produce 10 UPCs and not 50. And so that may, you know, kind of bump some of those out of the system. You know, if we see no sales behind it, then they're going to get removed eventually. You know, that number is coming from a couple of different sources. It's coming from, you know, any of the conventional retailers that we partner with IRI with. So those are the kind of the larger retailers that you're familiar with, Target and Walmart and things like that. We have what we call innovation marketplace, and those are UPCs, retailers that are proprietary to Spins. They don't partner with anyone else. And that's where we see all the, like, the local products, the new innovative products. You know, these are the products that are really driving incubation and innovation within the industry more broadly. And they tend to exist within kind of the channels of business, the natural and the regional players, before they kind of move to more mainstream outlets. And frankly, once a retailer sees, you know, a product that has moved into, call it Walmart, they're probably less likely to carry it in their store. So they're more likely to say, hey, we're going to delist that from our assortment. We're going to find something else to replace it that kind of meets, you know, some, you know, like the newest trend or something that, you know, some interesting innovation that we've seen that customers are responding to.
Thanks, Jeff. I think the next question is for Matt. It's around shelf life and how that may influence chances of getting into the food service sector, whether there's a preference, for example, for products with a longer shelf life versus fresh.
Yes, it is easier to sell shelf stable or frozen products, just because the distributor is going to be more wary of a more perishable shelf life, because they do not want to get stuck with products. So if you have a more perishable product, it is more challenging. You just need to find a bigger end user or operator to really bring you into distribution, so the distributor knows that the turn or the movement is going to be there. But yeah, frozen and shelf stable is easier.
Thanks, Matt. Do either of you have any information for folks that may be working with seafood products and whether there's special considerations for those types of companies?
I don't know if, I mean, we certainly will code for some of the sustainability practices in harvesting seafood. If it's kind of like traditional seafood, we look at some of the plant-based alternatives to seafood as well. But that's kind of as low as we go when it comes to kind of identifying seafood more broadly in the store.
Thank you. Do either of you have any stats on growth in the non-alcoholic alcohol alternative sector in New England, given that it's growing briskly globally?
I don't, I mean, anecdotally, you know, we've seen that there has been certainly a kind of nationwide an increase in kind of alcohol replacements. You know, and so we see that in a couple of ways where, you know, again, we think about a lot of times where we see some of the immunity wellness products that may start in vitamins and supplements. When they make that shift into something like center store, they're doing that through beverages. And we've seen a ton of innovation around some of, you know, kind of wellness benefits that you could have in kind of a non-alcoholic drink, but that could also be true for enhanced waters. It could also be true of teas and coffees. And so I think that that's just responding to kind of the health and wellness that we're seeing kind of more broadly. I could do a follow-up to look at some data specifically for the Northeast on that. You know, when I looked at alcohol itself, obviously state laws can really hamper kind of what that looks like. every state's going to be different. And so that, that's a bit of a challenge there. But if we're looking at non-alcoholic, then, that's something that we could firmly look at within our database. And so, Sue or Tanya, if you want to kind of pass that along to me, I'm more than happy to kind of do a follow-up after the call.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
Of course.
Another question in the chat has to do with consumer expectations. This particular individual was asking about new interest from food companies in having processors shift from artificial colors to natural food-based colors, and how that affects the quality of the product in terms of, I think, color probably. And they're wondering about whether you're seeing any discord, I guess, with what consumer expectations are given this pressure to shift to natural.
I can speak to the consumer kind of intent portion of it. Part of the work that we do for coding is to look at kind of ingredients. And so we kind of bucket those into kind of two different ways, kind of seeking a particular ingredient within a product or avoiding a particular product. So this kind of idea of artificial colors, flavor, preservatives would firmly be in that avoidance bucket. And consumers certainly, depending on the demographic that you're looking at, the category that you're looking at, certainly we see a lot of more naturally focused brands that have just done that kind of wholesale over the course of many years. One of the other attributes that we look at that I think is really helpful is we call it vital clean, but it's really clean label. Like, are there any kind of ingredients that could be untoward that people are looking to kind of remove from the supply, kind of the ingredient list? That's something that we've kind of tracked and continue to track. So I know that there's a lot of interest, and consumers, shoppers are really kind of looking at the cleanest label possible. If I use plant-based, because that's kind of the girl in the room, at least for us right now, a lot of times there is this kind of criticism of, it's a natural product, but it has all these kind of fillers and binders and everything else. We've really seen over the last, call it 12 to 18 months, that even products like that are looking to remove and clean up their labels as much as possible. So that if I'm a health and wellness shopper, I'm looking for immunity, something like an artificial ingredient or a preservative is something that's kind of on my no consume list. I'm really focused on something that's going to provide some benefit, and I'm not looking for those ingredients. And so that we can kind of overlay that across categories and all the rest of it too.
Thank you. Very interesting. And another question on trends related to shelf-stable, ready-to-drink cocktail products. Any new trends in that particular product area?
The one that that just kind of stands out to me, and we talked about it, I guess it was about a year ago, when we saw like juice sales starting to kind of decline. And then we started to see kind of real fruit juice used in these kind of mocktails, if you will. So you still have kind of like these kind of core constituent ingredients within store, but they're being used for different categories. And I think that just, part of it's a cleaner label, like I said before, but from a craft cocktail standpoint, we're seeing some of those kind of tropical fruity flavors that are kind of showing up. And I think some of that's in response to declining sales, kind of a negative sugar perception, perhaps, within the juice aisle itself.
Great, thank you for that information. I think that's our last question in the chat. We have just a few minutes left. I invite anybody, if I missed you, to go ahead and unmute yourself and add your question. Set for a minute to see if there's anything we missed.
I just had a question for Jeff, just a clarifying question. The data that you showed was 2021 versus 2020. Is that correct in all the categories if you were showing a gain or a loss?
That's correct. And we because we just closed out 2021 with our last data update. So that should be through all of the Q4 holidays that we looked at. We were absolutely looking at sales that same time last year. But the caveat on that too is that the last 2 years have been like crazy and wild when it comes to growth rates. And so, you know, if we're looking at something and it has 60% growth versus last year, 20% growth, to me, like in a regular year, if that was kind of normalized, you'd be like, oh my God, it's like 100%, or like it's like the scale has really kind of moved. And I was kind of thinking about the presentation and kind of preparing last night. One thing that kind of popped into my mind was, you know, kind of seasonality of products, where we see kind of like certain products being purchased at certain times, and we can kind of track that seasonality. We see more pasta and soup when we get into fall and winter. We see less of it in the summer, for example. You know, I was thinking about how all products have really kind of like taken on a new seasonality that's really COVID specific. I.e. when people are, you know, moving into winter and you're less likely to maybe go to restaurants, you're shopping at your grocery stores more. How does that affect kind of the seasonality of products? And so that's one of the things as we're kind of moving into, because we'll cycle the panic buying in March of this year. And so we're like almost to the point that we feel like we have like fresh data to be able to kind of really understand like what's happened over the last year, and how do we like start to kind of let that settle out and kind of understand like how do retailers start to do category management again? You know, how do they start thinking about store resets and category resets? You know, how do, you know, people really understand trends kind of more broadly when things have been so kind of like kind of wild and wonky, frankly.
Wacky is what I was going to say. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And so what I heard in another webinar that I attended was that in looking at the trends, because 2020, so you showed in some of the categories being down versus 2020, which we know there was like a big spike. And so people said, well, when you're really looking at trends, if you're going to do a sales presentation or something like that, definitely if you see a negative decline, is show it versus 2019, 20, and 21. So show that 2-year view, because you will most likely see that it's on the it's still higher than 2019. It just is lower than 2020 because of the craziness of 2020. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. 100%. You know, I think until we get past kind of March of this year, that kind of looking at that 2-year stack is really important, because you need, I mean, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to kind of get back pre-COVID to understand, you know, what were sales before, how do I kind of put that in context appropriately? Mm-hmm. Because it could be down, but you're like, okay, well, this category is down 1%, but it was up like 150%. And so is it really down? Like that's where, you know, I intentionally didn't use that 2-year stack because I wanted just to kind of see what kind of current market conditions were. But as we're moving into March of this year, then certainly we're like pen at the ready trying to kind of figure out like, so what really has changed over the last 2 years, 2+ years. So if you're a brand or a retailer struggling to kind of understand and make some sense of it, that 2-year comparison, I think, has been really critical. I mean, we've leaned into it for probably the last year really heavily, just to be able to say, in some cases, hey, this is down, but it's not really down. And so I think that's 100% correct.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff. And with that, we're at 9 a.m. So we're going to adjourn for this morning, and just want to give a big thanks again to our presenters, Matt Cotton and Jeff Crumpton. Our next webinar is on Thursday, the 27th, also at 8 a.m. We'll post the link to the recording from today's session online, and you'll get that information in a follow-up email. And if anyone has questions in the meantime, you can reach us at sellingmoremainfoods@gmail.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a good morning.
Thank you.